I'm starting a video series here for a couple of reasons. One is to hold myself accountable for continual growth and knowledge expansion. And two is it's something I spend a lot of time on. And yeah, I want to share my journey because I think it could be helpful. So the channel is Investment Journey. I haven't decided yet. But basically, I want to start off by kind of explaining what is my journey through investing and share some things I learned along the way that may be helpful. So, I'll start off by saying it makes sense why a lot of young people do not invest, because when you do not have any kind of significant savings, it's very difficult to consider investing as a useful skill to learn. Your return on investment, so to speak, doesn't seem worth it. And I think to an extent that makes sense, but at the same time, something that changed my perspective drastically is looking at a compound interest calculator. So if you go on Google and you type in compound interest calculator and you start plugging in some numbers. Now, when you start investing, maybe you're going to start with some very safe assets like an S&P 500 index. I can talk about what that is for those people who are brand new to investing. But just a combination of 500 of the largest US companies. So that index brings them all together at different weights, and you get to invest in that with one ETF. So anyways, maybe you're looking at a 10% return, let's say, on average per year. And you plug that in, and when you extrapolate that over time, it's quite astounding how the compounding of that interest adds up. So what I did was I started plugging in numbers, and I was thinking like, okay, if I work really hard on my career and I get an extra $20,000, what's the impact of that for me over the next 20 years? Versus if I learn the skill of investing and I'm able to make a return of 20% per year on the money I already have saved, what's the impact? So one is linear. So meaning if I make an extra 20,000 per year, that's an extra $20,000 per year that I make. But the compounding effect of the 20%, each 20%, assuming you keep your investments in the market, it adds to it, and it compounds, and it's an exponential increase compared to a linear increase. So the first thing I would recommend people do when considering why to invest is just Google a compound interest calculator and punch in some numbers. See what your return is on a 10, 20, 30% return per year. Traditionally, 30% per year is like you're a market wizard. You're just unbelievable. But we live in a day and age where there's an adoption of new technologies, and it's very possible to do more than that. So type in 50% and see what happens over 10 years. Or, double your salary and just save without compounding it. And compare those numbers and see where do you want to spend your energy. Okay, so that's number one. The profitability based on the exponential nature of investing because of compound interest. Because interest that you make, it compounds and it adds on top of what you already have made. Second thing is, after I had saved a bit of money in my life, I started to think about, okay, what do I do with this money? And I learned, unfortunately, that our money is being inflated away. Meaning, to put it simply, all governments are printing money. And our currencies that we operate in are called fiat currencies. A fiat currency, I believe, means something along the lines of, it shall be done, or something of that nature. It's not backed. It's backed by simply trust. So there was a period of time where every dollar was backed by a piece of gold that was held. It was backed by a commodity that had intrinsic value. However, we live in a time where our currencies are not backed by any commodities. which means that it gives governments the ability to print more of that currency whenever they feel like it. And unfortunately, governments use that tool all the time instead of taking the economic hit of dealing with whatever's happening on the global or the local scale that's causing a downturn. Just to give you some stats, I live in Canada, and in the last year, our currency, our money supply is inflated by 5.79%. 5.79% meaning we've printed 5.79% more money without necessarily generating any extra value. So that money has been devalued. In 5 years, our currency is inflated by 45.83%. 45.83% of our money has been printed extra without necessarily any correlation to increasing value. So you're devaluing your currency when you print that money. In 10 years, it's 87.5% increase, and in 20 years, it's 228% increase. What happens when you print money is the value of that money goes down, because whatever value you're offering as a country is now distributed amongst more units of currency. And so everyone is feeling it. We're feeling that our purchasing power, our ability to buy goods and services with our currency is lessening. Things are getting more expensive naturally because our money is being inflated. Okay, there's more money for the same value or for similar value. So when you look at those figures, I think there's some figures given by governments around inflation around 2-3%. It's not the case. If you look at just how much money is being printed, you can see that that's not the case whatsoever. From what I understand, the ultimate measure is the measure of purchasing power. However, the way purchasing power is measured can be manipulated. Governments can take and remove items in that basket of goods which they use to determine what your purchasing power is based on what they feel like. So if coffee is inflated too much, maybe it gets removed from that basket of items that they use to measure inflation. And now your inflation is lowered. It's not a solid metric. So for me, looking at the inflation of the currency, how many units of money are being added on a yearly basis by percentage is a way for me to get a sense of the rate of inflation. So once you understand that if you have cash, you are losing money. You're not staying still. You are actively and massively losing money in the same way that investing in something at a 10 or 20% compounding rate, you're gaining money. It's the same thing in the opposite direction with our currencies because they're being inflated. Why do governments print money? Because it's a short-term, quick and easy solution out of financial difficulties. We can look to one of the biggest money printing events in history, COVID-19. We have a pandemic. The government says, okay, you're not allowed to interact, and most people are not allowed to work. I had a physical job teaching martial arts, which it was illegal for me to do. And so, hey, stay home and take this money. Is that money coming from any value? No, the money is being printed. That's why we have that 45.83% inflation of our currency in Canada over the last 5 years. So, your money is being eaten away simply by existing. So, you really have no choice but to take a chance on investing, or you are guaranteed to lose. So, what do we invest in? I started off by looking at traditional metrics around, I mentioned S&P 500. For those of you who are brand new to investing, it's basically the 500 largest US companies that you can invest in one, what they call ETF, electronically traded fund. I got to look into what the actual acronym stands for, but basically all of those together in different weights. And so I think 10% return is pretty average for the S&P 500 over its history. Now, as I invested, and I realized, I think I started investing at the end of 2023, beginning of 2024, and I started doing well. I was like, oh my goodness, like I think I made 20%, 15%. It was a good year. And so I started kind of experimenting and exploring what to invest in and what was giving the greatest returns. And we'll talk about risk adjusted return, but for now I'll keep it simple. What was giving the greatest returns? And so I started investing in individual stocks, which is more risk. It's not as diversified, if that makes sense. And then I started to learn about, I guess you could call a secular trend, or something that is going through a phase of adoption. So, for example, in the 90s and early 2000s, there was the dot-com bubble where the internet was being adopted by the entire world. So it was inevitable. It was a secular trend. It was a trend that was going to continue no matter what up and down would occur in anything in the world and in the markets. The adoption of the internet was unstoppable. And what that meant was anywhere you put your money would go up in that period of time. Now, unfortunately, what happens in those situations is people get very speculative and they over leverage themselves, which causes the dot-com burst and bubble. They get too euphoric, they lose groundedness in touch with reality, and that's part of a cycle like this. So the thing is, these types of adoption cycles can give an unbelievable return on investment, because what's happening is network effects are increasing. Network effects meaning the adoption by more and more and more people. More and more people are bringing attention and bringing money and value into that sector, and so the sector's value goes up exponentially. So that was the period of adoption of the internet. In 2025, what's being adopted? I think most people know at this point that the two main things being adopted is AI. You could say three: AI, robotics, and cryptocurrency. Maybe starting off with Bitcoin. I'm going to start, because this video is going to be extremely long, just with Bitcoin for a brief explanation, best I can do. And then in the future videos, I'm going to go further into other topics. So, we talked originally in this video about money, fiat currency, and how it's not backed by anything of value. It's a trust system. And in that trust system, governments can print money as they please to solve their problems in the short term. However, what that money printing does is it devalues the currency, because there's the same value with more units. Okay? So you're losing value when you hold cash. Now, Bitcoin was designed knowing that throughout history, governments and rulers who control the currency have always inflated the currency. These fiat currencies do not last. I can't remember what the stats are around the average time, 80 years or 100 years that these currencies exist, but inevitably they get inflated away, over-debted, over-leveraged, and inflated away. Bitcoin was designed such that at, I believe, 21 million, I should know that, coins is the maximum amount that will ever exist by design. So it is uninflatable by design. It's also decentralized, meaning there isn't one controlling party. The power is distributed amongst all the people who are mining. Oh, that's a more complicated concept, but to keep it simple, it is not a centralized currency. There isn't somebody who can say, I want to print more of this, I want to change this. It takes an extraordinary amount of energy and consensus of everyone in the network to change anything. And for 14 years or whatever it's been now, it's been bulletproof. So a currency, a system designed to be uninflatable and decentralized so it can't be changed, is a natural logical solution to the problem of the inflation of fiat currencies and the loss of value that everyone are experiencing who hold money, who hold cash. The savings that we get from our banks, the insulting percentages in your savings account, is losing money. If you compare it to what the inflation rate is, as I understand, your 3, 4, 5% savings is not enough to keep up with the inflation that's going on in almost any country, in every country in the world. Because, countries like United States, there's some of the actually better countries when it comes to inflation, but go to Argentina, 5 years ago, go to most African countries, the inflation rate is much, much, much higher. So you have a technology that was developed so that it cannot be inflated away, okay? And it's also not centralized, meaning there can be no central governing party who controls it and manipulates it. And that's kind of the key issue with the loss of value of money. So here we go. Traditionally, something like gold, which is scarce, would be used as a similar kind of technology. However, Bitcoin is also going through an adoption curve, meaning more and more people throughout the world, year by year, are realizing that this technology is superior. Why is it superior? Not only is it a hard currency, meaning it's not inflatable. Gold, you could argue, it's mostly uninflatable, but we can find more gold, we can dig deeper, and there's tricks that, we won't get into it, but there's tricks that governments and large players play to manipulate the price of gold. Bitcoin is very difficult in that respect to manipulate in terms of the amount of Bitcoin that exists, and it's easily transactable. If you want to buy $1 billion worth of gold or $100,000 worth of gold, that is a chunk of metal that you have to figure out what to do with. Bitcoin, you can transfer across borders, globally, quickly, cheaply, and in terms of a store of value, it's just a better design. It's easier to manage than gold. So, the world, little by little, is realizing the value of this technology, and it's going through a process of being adopted, not just by the average person, but now by institutions, and it seems like this year by countries. Well, it's already happened in terms of El Salvador, but by the largest economic power in the world, we're waiting on seeing if the United States will adopt Bitcoin in some reserve strategy. I wanted to keep this video a little bit more basic and simple because I think it's really easy to go into the weeds in any direction, or even just to, not even the weeds, but to get more detailed in a way that kind of loses the general point. And the general point of this video is to understand, 1, why you need to invest, and 2, what to invest in to get the best returns so that you can free yourself, that you can reach greater levels of security and financial freedom, and that to open your life up to more possibility and a better quality of life. I'll leave it at that for now. I'm aware of many areas in which I can improve on my explanation, but this will be my start. Cheers.